I was so excited to get my shipment from Last Bottle Wines in the mail the other day, full of incredible red wines, all from Napa Valley. I love wine tasting, so having this to my door couldn't be happier. Also, couldn't be more excited that today's episode is brought to you by Last Bottle Wines. If you don't know already, they're a Napa-based online wine shop with a twist. They offer just one handpicked wine per day until it sells out, and they're always at incredible prices. We're talking 30 to 70% off retail. And the best part is that there's no subscriptions, no fees, and no minimum purchase. And I could not be more excited to bring this offer right now because they're having a marathon sale, which is coming up March 28th and 29th. Even better, we're offering Dateable listeners 10% off your first order with code DATEABLE. So if you are a wine lover like me, this is a great time to join. And did I mention that shipping is 100% free? So what are you waiting for? Mark your calendar for March 28th and 29th, or get on it earlier if you want. You can sign up at lastbottlewines.com and use code DATEABLE and find out why Last Bottle is the most fun way to discover and buy amazing wine. We are so thrilled to be partnering with Hinge. Hinge is the dating app designed to be deleted. As you all know, I'm a huge Hinge advocate as I met my partner of almost 3 years on the app. Even before meeting him, Hinge was always my go-to app because I met more relationship-minded people here and had some great dates. Clearly, I haven't been on the app for a little while, but I re-downloaded it to check out some of the new features. One that stood out to me was the voice prompt, my best friend's take on why you should date me, where your friend can hype you up. Not only does this make the profile creation less daunting, but it's not always easy to see your own green flags. So to test it out, I asked Yue some fun prompts to get her take on what I could put if I was dating again. So the first one, how long have we known each other? What was your first impression of me and how has that changed?
Julie and I have known each other for almost 10 years. My first impression of Julie was that she's very social, but I've learned that she has a lot more depth to her beyond the social butterfly that she is.
My next prompt, what do you think are my green flags?
I would say she's deeply loyal. She believes in love, curious mindset, and she is fearlessly ambitious.
And then last but not least, what kind of friend am I?
Julie is the kind of friend who will always have your back, no matter what.
Damn, that feels nice to hear. So download Hinge and try voice prompts today. Then find someone worth deleting the app for.
Hi, I'm Yue Xu.
And I'm Julie Kraftchick.
We're active daters turned dating sociologists.
Here to dive into everything modern dating and relationships.
Welcome to the Dateable Podcast. Welcome back, friends. And let's discuss dating in all its glory. While we're still on this summer break bonus episode period, it's been really fun bringing back old episodes, even just for ourselves, because we have so many freaking episodes.
Every week we're like, okay, which one are we going to do? You know, last week was Sex Party. That was an epic one. This week we're really excited too, because, you know, when you've done 300 plus episodes, some of these gems can get lost. That's just the reality. And, you know, we can only control Apple Podcasts and Spotify so much. Like, there's no way for us to pin these and bring them back. So I think this has been a good alternative.
Many of you have DM'd us saying, you all should do an episode on this topic. And then more likely than not, we'll have already done that topic, and then we'll just send you the link. But it's so funny, like there was one recently about herpes, right? You know, a lot of people always want an episode about herpes. We do. We have an episode called Yes, I Have Herpes. That's the episode name.
With the book by the same title. Yes. No, that was such a great episode. And I really think like Spotify actually, I would say a little better than Apple Podcasts, like for search. If you type in herpes dateable, you probably would have got it back.
I hope you all do.
Let's just make that our SEO keywords that bring us to the top.
I want like page 1 Google ranking for herpes.
Okay, I'm just going to say when we get our Google stats, what's always at the top is diaper fetish. Always at the top. Either a lot of other people haven't done content in this topic, which is possible that we've gotten our niche somehow. We did do 2 episodes on the topic, not just 1, but 2. No fail, it always comes back.
So what you're saying is we should really be bringing
Pivot.
diaper fetish episode. Yes, just for SEO. It was still both of those episodes were great. And we still reference it till today. So obviously they made an impact on our lives. But yeah, maybe it's like the more niche topics will get us page one views.
Yeah, SEO wise, maybe not listens wise. It's actually warmed my heart that we've had a bunch of people reach out recently about the friendship episode we did, saying that it was just really, what they needed to hear in that moment. And it makes me really happy because, it is that relationship that we just don't talk about as often.
Yeah. And something that's at the core of everything we do every day. You're always going to have friendships, throughout life, but relationships can come and go. I realized that to have a healthy, sustainable relationship, you almost do have to build that friendship first. And I think that's why, back in the day when you meet a coworker, a neighbor, someone through a friend, and then you develop a romance over time, those relationships are pretty solid because you didn't start with the premise of just being romantic. And I think sometimes these days we skip that step because we go straight to the romantic side of things. And then we, kind of forget building that friendship is so important.
Definitely. I think, though, our generation actually is set up well for this at the same time. Like, I hear what you're saying about the meeting and all that, but I do think the gender roles being down and not being as much of a focus anymore. We're going to go into a deep dive next week on Barbie movie. Yue and I have yet to see it. We want to retract our sexist comments because we've heard that the Barbie movie is, just all about women's empowerment. But I was like talking to my mom about this and she's like, oh, I don't know what it's going to be like to go with your partner and, have him watch it with you because it's like more, again, I haven't seen it yet, but I guess what I've heard is it's more about like women living their lives. And my response to her is I was like, I don't think he's going to react that way because like, that's not how our relationship is set up. Like he fully understands that I don't need him in any way. I choose him every day. Having that mentality sets you up to find a partner that you do have that friendship with. It's not like you're going because you need something from them.
I'm not retracting my comment. I still think Barbie is very sexist as a product. I think the movie, it's a feminist movie. I totally get it. That's a different point that they're trying to make. But if you didn't know what the movie is about and you see all the marketing, all you want to do is be like Barbie, dress like Barbie. And it's like these basic bitches in like their pink costumes on Instagram every day. That's the part I can't get behind, that we're still perpetuating this image that Barbie is kind of like the ideal. But I think in the friendship realm, though, it's like many of you have said, these are things I tolerate in dating, the ghosting, the bad dating behavior. And if you were to ground that from a place of friendship, you would never tolerate that with a friend. If a friend ghosted you, you'd be like, what the fuck? You call them out. You'd be like, what are you doing? So for some reason, the same standards we have for friendships, we don't apply them to relationships or in early dating, let's just say. And I hope that we can do more of that. After this episode, we can say, well, if I treat my friends this way, and my friends treat me this way, I should expect the same in dating.
I mean, I think this ties into this episode that we're re-airing too today, as we're talking with Mark Manson, who is best-selling author. You've probably heard of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. He has a new movie out too that I caught. It's funny. I heard him on a different podcast and he's like, you can catch my movie on an airplane. And I'm like, that's actually where I saw it.
Yeah, that's the only place I saw it.
So I'm not sure if it's just widespread or maybe that is the best demographic. I don't know. You are a captive for potentially 5 to 6 hours, depending on where you're flying.
That's true.
Yeah, you just need to I saw like podcasts on United. I'm like, how do we get on here? Because this is a good audience to reach, right? People are bored. But anyways, I think this episode, I mean, you probably have heard, I think the article, it's like fuck yes or fuck no. He wrote this article a long time ago. And it was basically about like, if you don't feel like a fuck yes to someone, like, what are you even doing? And he's become this unofficial dating guru, which is not what he set out to do. But I think a lot of his advice of just life holds true for dating. But he did do this Audible original called Love Is Not Enough. We got the pleasure of speaking with him after. And, you know, we talk about that of like he followed a handful of daters and some of them were in situations that were less than ideal, but they stayed because they believe like love conquers all. Yeah. Or they also felt like they had this vision of what love is. So there was like one I remember that he was like, oh yeah, I can go travel across the country for a first date. And there's something very like innocent and romantic about that, but just also very unrealistic and living in a fantasy. So it was a very interesting conversation of just like how society portrays love and how that actually gets in our way. And you know, we love talking about this topic. We've talked about society, how society's fucked us pretty much for years.
Yes. Over and over again. I feel so violated by society. And this topic of love, and even going back to when I was 13 years old, thinking about love and what that would be like, I truly felt like that'd be the end. That's it.
Yeah.
You fall in love with someone, that's it. You've reached life's ultimate goal and you're going to be happy. And that's why it's so elusive and that's why it's so coveted. And I remember the feeling of falling in love for the first time to my high school boyfriend at age 16. It's so funny because he and I still talk. He lives in LA. We have these deep conversations all the time. I will never forget him because he is my first love and he just happens to be in LA too. And the first time he said, I love you, I remember just being like, that's it. I don't need to go to school. I'm done.
Life goal unlocked.
Yeah. Let's do this. We're going to get married. Like life is over, like in a good way. But then all the issues came up, all the traumas came up, all the drama. And I remember just being a 16-year-old being like, why is just being in love not enough? Why are there so many other issues? And when you don't have an answer to that at 16, you carry that into your 20s, into your 30s, into your 40s. You're like, why is there more beyond love? So it's so great that he's able to uncover the mystery of love. Like, that's great. You can fall in love and something so beautiful and wonderful, but it doesn't mean that are compatible still or that you can have a sustainable relationship just from love.
I love that you said 16 because I was like, I went through this at 31. So there's no age that you can't go through this. And even if you've been in love before, I think another love can hit you differently too.
Yeah.
Like I had such a hard time letting go of my, I would say, first real love, like mutual, like, I don't know. It's not like it was my first relationship, but it just hit me different than other past people. And I had such a hard time letting this go. I've talked about this on the podcast many of times, this on again, off again relationship, because in my head, I viewed this as the one, as the person. And he was also telling me that too. So it wasn't even just that I was making it up and living in a fantasy. Like he was telling me that, but then also couldn't actually do the things necessary to be in a committed long-term partnership. So it was like he was saying the stuff, but the actions weren't following through. And it was very hard to rectify. And I actually re-listened to this episode of Mark Manson. I think I was in the thick of this at the last part when I finally gave it that last run over COVID and decided like nothing had changed, that this relationship just wasn't going to work. But it was that example of like how love really is not enough. Like it's a facet of a long-term partnership, but it can't be the only thing.
And anybody in a long-term partnership will tell you, am I in love with my partner every day? No. There are days I don't love them. And then there are days that I do. And mostly I do. And there's always going to be love for them. But this idea that every day just you wake up with butterflies in your stomach, like, I'm so in love with you, babe, and we're going to take on the world together. It just doesn't, it's just so fantastical. And it's like not based in reality. And I also feel like, you know, going through what I'm currently going through, something that's been healing for me. as fucked up as this is, I look back through the text messages that he sent me during the time of his betrayal because I want to see what he was communicating to me. Did I miss something? And very easily he would say, I love you. I miss you. Can't wait to see you. Love you so much. Love you, love you, love you. Like just a lot of love yous. I don't know if there's a better example of how love is not enough. You can still say these things. And I'm not going to discredit them because we were in love, but it doesn't mean that this person's still good for me. Doesn't mean that this person's going to remain faithful to me. So it's relationships are so complicated. Love is so complicated, but it can be less complicated if we don't put all of our weight into one thing, right?
Yeah. It needs to be the whole picture. I think that's what I've learned. Like it's hard because I like still feel like I'm in that stage of relationship because I'm a little over two and a half years. So I haven't hit like 5-6 years, I'm a little afraid. There is a side of me that's afraid that I'll like lose that feeling when I wake up, of just like feeling so in love and having like every day feel that way. And it's not that like, I don't know, the inner romantics listening, it's kind of depressing to hear like, oh, there's days that you just don't love your partner, or when they say I love you, it's not enough to hear. But I think ultimately it's like, it's a piece of the puzzle. It's not the entire bit. Like other things need to be in place too. And like words and actions need to align at the end of the day.
Yeah. Don't be afraid of that. It's not like you're going to wake up one day. I don't know. It could be different for you. It's not like you're going to wake up one day and be like, I'm not in love with my partner. It's just that you forget to feel that love. You just like not something you think about.
Yeah. Right. I think appreciation is so important. I mean, it's a little off topic, but it's like when you are with someone for a while, it's easy to take it for granted. And my partner and I actually like, there was a period, I wouldn't say we took each other for granted, but I think we've like re-stepped up of like, okay, we are very lucky that we found each other. Because you start to just get complacent of like, oh, of course, like this part of life is in place. We all want that love. That's what we all desire. That's what society's been fed to us. But this is a nice reality check of how it's important, but it's not everything.
What did Helen Fisher say about love chemically? That it's similar to taking Coke.
Yeah.
And something else. I need to look it up. Something very scientific. It does something to your brain so that you become addicted to it. Gives you this rush of adrenaline. Yet it's not. None of it is based in reality. Kind of like when you do Coke, you can't be doing Coke every minute of the day.
Well, I think it's a good point too. Is like lust in love is also very different. Like we conflate the two a lot, especially in the early days when someone hasn't proven that they actually are relationship material. We're going off of lust, which actually is kind of in line with this TikTok trend I wanted to bring up because I had the pleasure, unfortunately Yue had a prior commitment at the time, but I had the pleasure of being on All of It, New York Public Radio. Yue and I have been guests a couple of times. Looking back, I actually saw that we had been 5 times on that show.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't even realize it was that many. Or this was the 5th time, but still, it's a lot. But they actually reached out to us to talk about the triangle method, which has been taking TikTok by storm. So for anyone that's unaware, what it is basically eye contact that you go, I'm going to try it on Yue right now. I go from one left eye down to her mouth, down to her right eye, and then back to her left eye.
That was kind of creepy.
I will say that I think I'm just bad at this type of stuff because I get in my head. Like I've never been good at making like eye contact at bars. Like I always just look creepy. And I did the triangle method to my partner and he was just like, what are you doing right now? But why bring it up though? It's a very interesting topic because the reason why it's blown up on TikTok is it's like, this is the foolproof way to make someone fall for you or to fall in love. And I think, as a society, we're always looking for that like trick and hack. And especially in today's world where, you can get an Uber or a meal or anything in like 5 minutes, right?
Mhm,
At the
mhm.
touch of your fingertips. We're on demand. We want it instantaneously. So I'm not surprised that people are looking for this. But it's just one of those things too that it's so in line with what we're talking about. It's like you give one look and now your problems are solved and this person's
Right.
in love with you. Like that's just not how it works. And all for eye contact, but also like don't be creepy when you do it.
I can't wait to see people put this into practice. And also, how do these trends start on TikTok? I don't get
know.
it. Like one person does. We need to come up with our own method, the dateable method, and just have it take off. Like you stare at someone's right earlobe for 5 seconds. And then rub your left shoulder.
If someone was staring at my mouth, I would think I had like food in my teeth. I wouldn't
Yeah.
think that they were trying to hit on me and show their interest.
Yeah, I know. That's so strange. How about we just keep it simple? Just make eye contact. That's the one thing we don't do these days. And I find that so sexy when someone can maintain eye contact.
But not too much eye contact.
Oh yeah,
There's
I mean,
a line.
like, don't,
Yes.
yeah, don't be stalker staring. But yeah, when someone's talking to you,
Yeah.
even like just, I don't know, sometimes if I'm opening the door for someone or walking through a doorway and I come in contact with a stranger, it's so lovely when they make eye contact. They're like, thank you. It's very intentional.
So for that, I'm very all for the triangle method if it's going to give us an excuse to make eye contact.
Yeah.
I think that's really good. Or to even make your interests known. I feel like today's world, we're also afraid to show our cards in any way, that we're just hiding behind screens. So the more that people can engage in real life and make eye contact, that's phenomenal. But also don't get in your head and don't overthink it either. That's where it goes awry.
If it's not natural for you, don't do
it.
Like, don't.
Or don't use it to replace communication. Like, I don't think you can, like, give someone the eye and just be like, oh, they never walked over to me. They're not interested. Or they never asked me out further. They're not interested. They may not have even known that you were giving them the signal. Just ask. If you want to go out with them, ask.
Yeah, I know. We can't, there are no hacks.
Yeah.
And that's what people are looking for. I think that's what the trends are on TikTok.
Yeah, totally.
Everything's hacks, right? And I think they're hacks to like how to get your silver jewelry cleaner, like that. Yes. But how to get to someone's heart, there's just no shortcut to that.
No.
And yeah, these triangle methods, maybe like it helps improve your confidence. It improves your flirtatious skills, but it doesn't carve a path to someone's heart. Like that's not how it works. So yeah, I'd love to see all of you try it, but end of the day, just try eye contact. And I just looked up chemical makeup of when you're in love. And Helen Fisher says it's equivalent to if you have OCD on coke. So you become obsessively compulsive. You're obsessed with this person and this higher level of energy and dopamine that comes over you. So you can't get enough of this person. Like that doesn't sound healthy.
No. There's a lot of nuance of this topic. We can't wait for you to listen to this episode. Let's also discuss it. Send us your thoughts. Like, tell us, do you think this is a realistic view? Do you still feel like, now it's not romantic enough and you want to believe in the magic of love? Like, where are you on this love spectrum and how do you view it? Let us know because we'd love to hear your comments. You can always DM us at Dateable Podcast. Email us hello@dateablepodcast.com. This is a good call out too because we are getting ready to come back for season 17.
Oh!
And we're ready to take on some new brunch talk questions. So feel free to also send those. Maybe they relate to this topic or maybe they're totally different. We love it. We'll take it all. That's our announcement for today.
Don't forget rating and review.
Good call. Okay, we did not finish our announcements. We are at 700 on Apple and like 3 something on Spotify.
We're so close.
I think our goal could be 500 on Spotify and 1,000 still on Apple. If you can give us that 5-star rating, it really, really helps. If you're going to give us 4 stars or lower, maybe send us an email. We do like feedback, but it really does fuck us. So please try to be aware.
Anything lower than 4 stars, you can just keep it to yourself.
Or just don't listen, Not every podcast is for everyone, and that's okay.
Yeah, just like dating, right? Not everyone's going to be your cup of tea. So just keep moving along. If you go on a date, if you go on a first date with someone and you realize there's no chemistry, you're not going to be like slandering their name all over the internet, right? And that's what it feels like. If you listen to one episode and you're like, it's not for me, and then you give us a low rating, we would never do that to each other.
Yeah, this isn't a paid product. Like there's thousands of other podcasts out there. But if you do have constructive feedback or topics you want to hear, we had a great post in the Facebook community, Love in the Time of Corona. We did get a call out to change the name. We are also on it. We get it. We get it. There is I don't know how much longer I want to see Love in the Time of Corona either. We'll figure it out. We're on it. But regardless, we do love getting input on topics or anything that we can improve the show on. But also there are comments that are just like, okay, thanks. Like, what are we going to do with that?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Okay. Well, without further ado, let's hear a few messages from our sponsors.
This episode is made possible by the books The Falling and The Burning by Anna Todd. You may recognize the name Anna Todd from her #1 best-selling After series, but did you know that she has also written a new page-turning romance trilogy? The first 2 books, In the Brightest Stars, are out now and are perfect summer reads. They're called The Falling and The Burning, just in time to heat up your summer. Set against the backdrop of a military base, 20-year-old Karina is proud of the independent life she's trying to create for herself in Fort Benning, Georgia. A dutiful officer's daughter, supportive sister to a troubled twin brother, and caring friend to her roommate, she always puts the needs of others ahead of her own. And when she meets a handsome soldier on the cusp of discharge, she's immediately intrigued by him. As their uncertain and unexpected friendship starts to turn into something more. Get your hands on these 2 books, The Falling and The Burning by Anna Todd, wherever books are sold. This episode is sponsored by Via. We all know there are things that can help set the mood in the bedroom, but did you know a little THC could also do that? Yes, Via has developed a unique blend of pleasure-enhancing cannabinoids, libido-strengthening herbs, and a low dose of THC all into one mind-blowing gummy called High Love. This gummy, wow, it will awaken your senses, increase blood flow, and intensify any sexual experience. I've been pleasantly surprised by the High Love gummies because it is just the right amount of THC for me to have a good time without feeling sleepy. And hey, if THC is not your thing, Via also offers a wide array of other gummies without it. And everything legally ships in 50 states with discreet packaging directly to your door. So if you're over 21, you can get 15% off and a free pack of award-winning Dreams THC plus CBN sleep gummies with our exclusive code DATEABLE at viahemp.com. That's VIIAHEMP.com. Let the gummies work their magic. Head to viahemp.com and use the code DATEABLE to receive 15% off and 1 free sample of their Sleepy Dream gummies. That's viahemp.com and use the code DATEABLE at checkout. Take your passion and pleasure to a whole new level with High Love from Via Hemp.
As you know, I recently left my corporate job and I've been in total recovery mode, all about self-care. One of my new routines is the nighttime shower before bed. There's just something about washing away the day and that reflection that's been super helpful for me. I've been using one of our partners, Osea's Mega Moisture Duo. This combo body oil and body lotion are so freaking incredible. It literally feels like I'm at a spa. I realized that the secret is seaweed and other skin level ingredients that are normally reserved for face products. And that's why I was so excited when Osea became one of our partners. And, you know, we're so grateful for partners like this because one, they keep the show going, but they're also super good for all of our listeners and for our own well-being. So if you want to have that nighttime bliss like I am doing, you can get 10% off your first order site-wide with code DATEABLE at oseamalibu.com. You'll get free samples with every order and free shipping on orders over $60. So head to oseamalibu.com and use the code DATEABLE for 10% off. Let us know which products you end up going with. Share them in social. Super excited to see what you end up choosing. Okay, let's hear it from Mark Manson about why love is not enough.
A few years ago, there was an article that was so popular, I think we referenced it on multiple episodes. It was called Fuck Yes or No, and it was by an author called Mark Manson. And Mark and I guess what? We have a lot in common. We both started a relationship blog over a decade ago geared towards men. And I thought the same thing as you. I thought this is just for my male friends. Who's going to read it? Who cares? It's a great platform to just get my thoughts out there. And quickly, Mark saw his blog grow. And soon enough, strangers were reading this blog. Many people were coming to this blog. In fact, millions of people were coming to this blog. And that's where he is today. He is a self-help author, blogger, and entrepreneur. Obviously, we reference his very popular article, Fuck Yes or No, which can be found among many other articles on his website, markmanson.net. He's also the New York Times bestselling author of 3 books, Everything is Fucked, a book about hope, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, a counterintuitive approach to living the good life, and Models, Attract Women Through Honesty. What? No fuck in that? In that title? You missed one there.
You have the best title names by far.
But now he has an Audible original called Love Is Not Enough that brings his signature no-nonsense wisdom and a lot of fuck words back to the subject he started his career covering, which is about relationships. So he's 36 years old, lives in New York City, currently on lockdown, originally from Austin, and is married. So Mark, in Love Is Not Enough, kind of compare the Beatles song All You Need Is Love and then the 9 Inch Nails song Love Is Not Enough. Why do you think, this like rainbows and butterflies sort of approach to love, that love conquers all, is super flawed?
I think it's flawed in that we tend to assume that because something feels very good, it must be very good. And love tricks us a lot in that way. Like, we can fall in love with people who are bad for us. We can fall in love with people who don't treat us well or who are not healthy for us. But it's very hard to be aware of that when you're going through the experience of love or when you are falling for somebody. And so a lot of what I write about in relation to dating and relationships is trying to get people to be a little bit more thoughtful, a little bit more self-aware of, I guess, the broader picture when that is happening. And so I kind of use the Beatles and 9 Inch Nails reference just because it's, the irony with the Beatles is that, John Lennon saying all you need is love, but he like beat his wives and abandoned one of his kids and was just
most horrible husband.
Asshole. Yeah. And then Trent Reznor, this guy who's like so famous for doing all this fucked up stuff on stage, writes a song called Love Is Not Enough. And if you look at his personal life, he is like the most functional, responsible husband and father in the music industry. So I just thought it was a very cool dichotomy.
Why do you think our society as a whole idealizes love so much and like thinks it's the solution to all problems?
Well, I mean, I guess a very cynical answer to that question is love sells well. It's easy to sell love. We all love to see it. We enjoy romantic movies and we enjoy seeing, the people get together at the end of the movie and all those things. And so I think it's proliferated. One thing that's interesting is that this whole idea that love can solve our relationship problems, it's a pretty recent thing in human history. It's only a couple hundred years old. Most of human history, people were actually very cynical about love. They thought it was as dangerous, if not more dangerous, to the relationship than otherwise.
Mark, do you personally believe in love?
Absolutely. My take on it is that love is like anything else. Like there are healthy forms of love and there are unhealthy forms of love. Like we all do need love.
Right.
Lennon wasn't wrong about that, but we need to be careful and make sure that the love is serving us and helping us.
I also believe love is a choice. It's not that once you fall in love, all your issues go away. The dishes that are unwashed in the sink just somehow get cleaned all of a sudden. It's this choice and constant choice every minute, every moment. And I think sometimes we forget that in relationships.
Oh yeah. I think especially like if you're single, you think that suddenly if you're in a relationship, you're going to be happy. And it usually doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in your Audible original, Love Is Not Enough, it's so fascinating. You follow 5 real people over the course of 6 months, and they openly let you record all the issues that they're bringing to you. I think what's so fascinating is you relate everybody's problems back to like their history, their background, their upbringing, because I think sometimes we forget that that's what creates who you are today.
There's one of my favorite relationship books is a book by Harville Hendrix called Getting Love You Want. I'm biased, you've seen my book titles, but I think it's a terrible title. But the book is fantastic.
Doesn't have fuck in it.
It doesn't have fuck. It's not edgy, but it's he talks about how, our childhood and our upbringing, our relationship with our parents when we grow up, it kind of writes what he calls our emotional maps or our love maps. And it's basically like how we unconsciously like find love in our lives. And so when we keep running into the same dysfunctional relationships over and over again, he says it's usually because the love map that was written in our childhood pointed us to the wrong place. And so you have to kind of like learn to rewrite that map. In the case with the Audible original, like it was important to find out these people's history, to kind of like get at what their love maps were. But also it's like I'm talking to these people for about an hour a month and I'm like going in completely blind. So I have no idea who these people are. I don't know what their past relationships were like, what their parents were like, where they grew up, anything. So a lot of the early conversations were just me trying to like drill down as quickly as possible to look for patterns in their relationships in their lives.
So do you think it goes back to just the way you were raised and just like the mental models you have around love? Or do you think there's other reasons that we settle for these like less than ideal situations?
You know, I don't think upbringing ever explains everything. A lot of it depends on circumstances. You know, dating is often compared to a market, and there is a little bit of a market functionality to dating, you know, so depending on the city you're in, your religious beliefs, your political beliefs, your lifestyle, your gender, your sexual orientation, like all of those things kind of affect where you're going to meet people, the circumstances in which you're going to meet people. And so I think there's a real like kind of practical day-to-day life component that you have to consider as well. One of the people in the project was a woman in her 30s actually here in New York, who's just like basically been on like a 10-year dry spell with date. Like it's just for 10 years, she hasn't had a serious relationship. And one of my first, inclinations is like, well, maybe she's just looking in the wrong places. And I mean, yeah, she was on Tinder a lot, and Tinder is pretty notorious these days for having a low hit rate. And that probably was part of it. But at some point you have to realize like, okay, she's got some sort of pattern here that she's not aware of.
Right. Well, it sounded like for her too, she was definitely standing for way less than she deserved and taking kind of like crumbs of relationships.
And also just waiting for relationships to happen versus her going out and finding the right people.
Yeah, it was interesting with her. Without spoiling too much, when I was working with her, I really felt like I was spending most of the time like encouraging her to be more proactive. And it's something I generally encourage women to do, is to be more assertive and like upfront with what they want and how they feel. But then she was just meeting like the shittiest guys. So I'm like, well, maybe it's good that you didn't tell him that you wanted a relationship after all.
Why do you think like she kept meeting those shitty guys and she wasn't able to be like, this is not a healthy situation, this is not good for me? Like, what is it that some people cannot recognize? Because I know I've been there before. I've definitely been in situations that looking back, I'm like, why did I do that to myself? And I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I think a lot of people, and I see this in both men and women, I think a lot of people, they develop like some unconscious patterns or unconscious assumptions about like who they can date and can't, who is like an acceptable partner for them and who's not. And I don't even think they realize it, but they kind of self-select sometimes for a certain type of person who's just bad for them. And so they feel stuck. They're like, these are the only people I'm meeting, but none of them are good for me. When they don't even realize that they're overlooking a bunch of other people like very early on in the process without realizing it.
Well, what was interesting about her story was her life was a hot mess before. And she turned her life around and she thought, now's the time for me to attract that right person. So I think she almost assumed that whoever she attracted in her new stage in life would be the right person.
Yeah. And then, just to even add another layer of complexity on top of that, it actually started infiltrating. She actually started developing like a very negative set of beliefs around men in general. She was like, oh, well, when I was a mess, men loved me. And now that I'm like all put together and have my life in order, men don't want to have anything to do with me. So I guess men are just shit. And she developed a lot of like negative beliefs around men that obviously is also not conducive to to having a function. Because if you believe that all men are just like don't have your interests at heart, then you're going to kind of unconsciously select for the ones who don't, because they confirm what you already believe.
We talk about that a lot. It's like you're looking for a red car, for example, and everywhere now you see red cars. So it's like you kind of spotted that, and that's what you're seeking out at that point.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Your brain is an evidence finder, not a truth seeker. So your brain is just giving you all the evidence that your narrative is telling you.
Right.
And this is the narrative we hear from a lot of women who write into our show who say, I've worked so hard to get where I am today. I'm so professionally successful. I have great family and friends. I deserve a good man. Why can't I find a good man? There are no good men out there.
Yeah.
And that's the narrative they keep telling themselves, and they keep looking for the bad guys.
You know, this is something I say sometimes, and, you know, it might not be the most politically correct thing, but I think it's true, which is, as you guys, I'm sure you guys believe too, like relationship, it's a skill set. Like you have to learn these things and practice these things and develop these parts of yourselves. And I guess traditionally, if you look at previous generations, men were always kind of stereotyped as being very emotionally clueless. You know, and it's the classic male gender role was always like, okay, get really good at your career, make a bunch of money, and like all the soft, touchy-feely stuff, let women deal with it. And with feminism and with all the new gender roles, breaking down barriers and all this stuff, I think maybe there's a little bit of assumption with a lot of women that it's like, okay, well, I worked my ass off on my career, I'm making all this money, but they don't realize that they never developed those emotional skills.
Yeah.
Right.
So they're actually in a very similar position that men traditionally were in, which is they're super successful, very proud of themselves, high self-esteem, but they never actually learned how to develop intimacy and be in a relationship.
100%. So I think what I love about your Audible original is that you follow people like the woman we were just talking about that kind of stands for less than ideal situations, just in terms of men not committing or maybe treating her like a first priority and all that. And then you also talk about like more extreme ones, like a woman that is still dating a married man and some of the things that you like traditionally think of. How do you kind of identify when there is a bad situationship is what I was going to say, but that is maybe the right word.
That actually is the right word.
I was trying to say situation, but it is situationship. So it just came up by default.
Yeah. Not to rain on your poetic new word, but what do you mean by bad situationship?
I don't know, like a healthy relationship, right? You
Sure.
think of like when there's two very committed partnerships that treat each other like equals and really are giving to each other and taking as much in an equal fashion. And then there's these situations where one person is clearly not getting their needs met and continuing to go after the relationship despite feeling upset like the whole time. And I know like, I mean, I've definitely been there. It's like, I know logically this is not a good situation, but for whatever reason you keep doing it. And I guess like, what are some of the ways that you can spot when someone is in one of these unhealthy
toxic
situations?
relationships?
Yeah.
Gotcha. The other woman you brought up, she's a perfect example of kind of everything that we're talking about. Very high-powered woman, extremely successful in her career, extremely smart, and just stuck in a relationship with a married guy who turned out was like borderline emotionally abusive towards her. You know, one of the things that I discovered with her pretty quickly was that she grew up in such a dysfunctional household, like such an abusive childhood. That relationship she was in actually felt loving to her. That actually was the most loving relationship she had ever been in. And that was eye-opening, both for me and for her, to realize that. When all you've experienced is dad being drunk and like disappearing for months at a time, then sleeping with somebody at work who won't leave their wife for you is like, that's an upgrade.
So it's all relative, basically.
Yeah, but it's still not good, right? It's still toxic. One of the metaphors I use a lot to kind of help people determine whether the relationship is healthy or it's unhealthy is I think it comes down to conflict, how well you as a couple deal with fighting or disagreements. Generally, what I've found is that couples that are very healthy with each other, the conflict, it kind of has this feeling of pushing a rock like down a hill. It's, the more you work on it, the easier it gets. And it actually kind of brings you guys together. Whereas an unhealthy relationship, it feels like you're constantly pushing this rock up a hill. And it's like the more you push, the more difficult it gets. And then it doesn't matter how far you push it, it's just going to roll back down tomorrow anyway.
That's interesting because I feel like there's those situations where you walk on eggshells because you don't want to,
totally
rock the boat. And I think that's definitely to what you're
pushing
saying.
uphill.
Exactly.
And if your conflicts are never being resolved, I mean, that's why you walk on eggshells. Because it's like if your conflicts actually get resolved and bring you two closer together, then you don't mind having conflict. There's no reason to hide things from each other. But it's like if the conflict is just ripping a scab off over and over again, then it's like, okay, I'm just going to shut up and not say anything.
This reminds me of, remember, Julie, I told you about a friend of mine, and she and her husband fought for 2 years when they first got married because they welcomed conflict. So they got all the conflicts out of the way, and now they don't fight anymore because everything's so easy.
It's on the table.
Literally got it out of the way. And now thinking with
Yeah.
this period of pandemic and lockdowns, I think a lot of couples are going to have to face some of these conflicts head on right now.
Yeah. I think though what Mark, you were saying earlier about how some of it is a skill you have to learn. So I think some of it is obviously the partner you're with, but I think a lot of it is yourself too. Because I know from personal experience, like I think when I had these more toxic relationships in my life, yes, I probably picked the wrong partner, but I also was not comfortable with addressing conflict. And over the years, I've just learned to do that through therapy, through this podcast, like all these different things. So I think some of it is your own mental state and then also finding someone that's at that same mental state.
Totally. I mean, this is kind of another litmus test, right? Like in a toxic relationship, people tend to bring the worst out of each other. Whereas I think in a healthier relationship, your partner kind of makes you better. They see your weaknesses and flaws and they know how to adapt to it, and vice versa. Whereas in a toxic relationship, it makes each of you weaker.
Makes sense.
Your story really resonated with me because I have a lot of girlfriends and also guy friends who are high powered, who are very successful. And for some reason, they define their self-worth by the pedigree of the partners they attract. So he also went to an Ivy League. He's a startup founder and he's this and that. And I feel like he's a good match for me because he's pedigreed in that way. But they don't take into regard how good these people are and their personalities, and even if they get along and even if they're compatible. I sent your Audible original to a friend of mine because it reminded me of her so much, because for so long, she is just so incredibly smart.
I think I know who you're talking about.
No, you totally know who I'm talking about. She's so smart, business-wise, but comes to personal relationships, she only goes for guys who are, yes, very pedigreed, but come in and out of her life. They weave in and out. And to her, she's created this narrative that that's okay because they're so busy doing their huge accomplishments that the little time that they give her, that's love.
Yeah.
And it's been like this for 2 years, with the same guy. So I'm like, please listen to this. You need to listen to this.
Well, I guess that's I think you were saying earlier, Mark, some of it is relative to what love you've seen and what stories you're telling. What do you do when someone like that, we'll use that example, is like, but I'm in love with them? What do you say to that when you know it's an unhealthy situation, but they feel that love?
Love is not enough. I mean, it's like this. I know that sounds curt, but like really, this has kind of been my rallying cry in terms of like all my relationship advice for years now, is that we have to get over this idea that like, oh, but I love her. Or, oh, but I'm so in love with her. Well, it'll be okay. And it's like, no, it's not going to be okay. In fact, it's probably going to get worse. If you don't have respect, if you don't have trust, if people aren't committed, if they aren't, like you were saying, like they're not making that daily choice of like, okay, I'm going to sacrifice this to be with this person, it's not going to get better. So we have to kind of get over this idea, this romantic idea. Romance is great, feels wonderful, and it's important, but there are more important things to be optimizing for, I think, in our relationship.
And on the flip side of that is, oh, but Mark, I'm in love. Flip side is relationships are all about compromise. So when do you know you're starting to sacrifice too much to compromise for your partner?
Ooh, that's a good question and a tough question. I mean, I think there's a threshold where at some point, everybody ends up having to compromise in relationships. But I think there are certain things that are core to your identity and your values that have to kind of be sacred, that have to be off limits. It's like that cheesy Meatloaf song. I'll do anything for love, but I won't do that.
I used to play that on repeat 24/7.
I forgot about that song.
Anything for love. It was so passionate.
No, right? But we all have to have that. I think what people don't realize is that if you're willing to give up everything, every part of who you are, everything you care about, everything you value, you are removing the person that your partner fell in love with in the first place. You're kind of just gutting yourself emotionally of all content. It's self-defeating. It's one of those things that will maybe smooth things over in the short run, but it's in the long run, it makes things worse.
Let's hold that thought for a second. We'll get right back to it. Mark, I just had a business idea for you. You need to create a playlist that takes people through this journey. It starts with the John Lennon song, All You Need Is Love. And then you go to Meatloaf. And then you start getting into Nine Inch Nails, Love Is Not Enough. And then you just get into like some really real songs, maybe like one of the rap songs. But you just take people through a journey.
I see many lawsuits in my future.
You're like, I'm not going to do that business idea.
Yeah, a lot of copyright infringement.
How about a private playlist just so we can hear?
Just for us.
Yeah, there you go.
So I think one of the things that you talk about a lot is boundaries, which is very important. And I think we hear this over and over again. I guess, how would you define boundaries? Because I think there's something a little scary about the word boundaries. At least I feel that way sometimes.
Yeah, I think people kind of recoil at the idea of erecting barriers. We like to have the idea that, we can be open about everything and we can love everybody. And, it's like life doesn't work that way. Like there has to be a certain expectations of conduct between two people. And at the core of it, I define boundaries as basically being each person takes responsibility for their own actions and their own emotions. And they don't take responsibility for the other person's actions and emotions. And so what you see in a lot of relationship situations is one person is kind of a deadbeat or down on their luck or whatever. And the partner is like, oh, well, I'll get him a job and I'll pay his rent and I'll make sure, I'm going to send him back to school. And like, just, they start trying to fix the other person
while building resentment at the same time.
Totally. And the person being fixed starts building resentment too, because it's like their autonomy is being impeded upon. There are a lot of dynamics that play out. One I call the breaker and the fixer. One I call the runner and the chaser, which sounds like your friend. It's when one person is always pulling back from the relationship and the other person is always stepping forward to try to catch them and bring them back. It's a way to kind of experience the feeling of intimacy without actually having to expose yourself and be intimate with somebody. And so when we have porous and bad boundaries, we start developing these patterns with people, and the patterns become very destructive. They create a lot of drama, they create a lot of conflict unnecessarily, and neither person is really getting their needs met.
So what is an example of like the breaker and a fixer? Like what's a healthy boundary that you could put in place if you're in that situation?
So I can call on my own personal history here. My first relationship in my life, I was the fixer and my girlfriend was the breaker. And we were young, we were both very like emotionally dysfunctional. Ultimately, their strategies to feel loved and feel important and feel needed. She found that if she could cause problems, I would come and fix them. And when I fixed them, it made me feel needed and loved. And when I fixed them for her, she felt loved. But the problem is that as soon as I fix a problem, well, now she's got to find something else to break, because it's like, oh shit, he's not fixing something. I don't know if I'm loved anymore. Here, let me break this. And so it was just kind of this spiral of drama over and over. And it was just over stupid things. And it kept getting worse and worse and worse. Ultimately, the only way it stops is one of the two people opts out of the cycle. So in the case of a breaker, the breaker would have to say, you know what? I don't want you to fix anything for me anymore. I don't want you to get me a job. I don't want you to pay my rent. I don't want you to try to take care of me. I need to do this myself. And in the case of the fixer, it's saying the flip side of that, which is like, you know what? I'm not helping you anymore. You need to stand up on your own, take care of yourself. I still love you, but you need to be responsible for yourself. And generally in very unhealthy relationships, Like if there's not a whole lot of mutual respect and trust there, as soon as one person opts out, the relationship breaks. And that actually happens with Vanessa. I spend the first couple conversations with her, spoilers, but I spend the first couple of conversations with her, teaching her about boundaries and teaching her how to opt out of these cycles with the married man. And it's funny because she originally came to me and she's like, I don't know how to break up with him. I don't know how to break up with him. I want to get out. I want to get out. And it turned out she didn't even have to do anything. All she had to do was simply stop playing the game.
Right.
And he immediately broke up with her. It's like, wow, you're done. You know, like.
Well, it kind of goes back to your litmus test earlier. Like if someone's willing to work with you on conflict or not. And a lot of times in these situations, like you just said, they're not willing to work with you. So it just ends. I don't know. I mean, if there was a situation where someone felt like they were the fixer and the breaker, but then they had that healthy boundary, and at that point, the two partners were able to work together, maybe it would turn more healthy. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so the alternative outcome is, you know, let's say the breaker's like, you know what, I don't want you to fix my problems anymore. I need to do this on my own. And the fixer's like, oh yeah, okay. That's fine. Because what you're doing is you're relieving the fixer of the responsibility of dealing with all these things. And so both people can sit with that and not freak out and not lash out at each other. Then it actually, that is how you transition into a healthy relationship.
Got it. So it's not always doomed. There's a way to turn it around.
No, it can be fixed. Yeah, it can be fixed. Or I don't like the word fixed. Like it can evolve.
Right. And what about with the chaser and the runner? What are some boundaries they can set?
Yeah.
It's just, I'm not going to chase anymore. In the simple case of, so like the woman we were talking about, like she had a guy who was just ghosting her constantly. And I'm like, well, look, like be straight up. Like, do you want to date me? If yes, stop ghosting me. If no, peace. You know, like that's a boundary, right? It's like when you draw a line in the sand and you say, I am no longer tolerating this behavior and this is what's going to happen. And sure enough, he ghosted her again and it's like it fell apart.
Well, I think people have trouble with boundaries because they're afraid of that outcome. Like, I think there's a lot of feeling like, well, at least I have someone, at least I have something going on. And not to say that that's healthy, but I think that's where the boundary creation gets scary.
And also, you have to know where your intentions for the boundaries come from. You can't set these boundaries hoping for him to say, no, I want to be with you. Right. And then you're super disappointed when he doesn't do that. You actually have to believe in the boundary that you're setting.
Right. Yeah. It can't be a game. Yeah.
It's anytime you gamify anything in relationships, you're ruining it. And it's what you just said reminds me of like when I wrote my men's dating book, which is it's called Attract Women Through Honesty. I used to get emails when it first came out. I used to get emails from guys, and this is back when the whole pickup artist thing was going on. And I used to get emails from guys, and they're like, hey Mark, read your book, was really cool, but I tried the whole honesty thing, didn't work, man. It's like it totally didn't get laid.
You're missing the point. Yeah.
You are doing it wrong.
Oh my God. I think that though, that ties into this whole, like you brought this up in the Audible original of like this holding on to a fantasy. And I do think that is part of why people don't want to create the boundary. How do you think like this idea of pretending like things are going to work out or pretending like things are great or you, I don't know, can see a future with someone that might not be in your life at all, whatever that fantasy is, how do you think that is destructive to people?
The fantasy thing was really interesting. So when I went into this project, it was pretty obvious that there are going to be a few themes just because I've been writing about this stuff for so long. Right. So I knew boundaries were going to come up. You know, I knew vulnerability and honesty was going to come up. That always comes up. The fantasy thing was really interesting because that was the one thing that I started connecting the dots on that as the project went on. I started to realize, so there was one woman who came in, her issue was specifically around fantasy. She actually like compulsively fantasized about another woman who was not her partner. And it was causing all sorts of stress and problems in her life. And at first I was kind of like, oh, she's a little bit of the oddball here. Like like everybody else had like boundary issues and honesty issues and self-esteem issues and all this stuff. And it's like, then you've got this one woman who's just like got this fantasy thing going on. But as the project went on, I started to realize that all these other people had fantasy issues too. It's just that their fantasies weren't as, I guess, obvious. So there's one man in it who his name's Jerry, and he's twice divorced, and both divorces were catastrophic. He's got like some PTSD type things going on from them, and he's in his first new relationship, and he's really into his girlfriend, and he's struggling with he's literally afraid to tell her that he thinks it's too cold in the room, because talk about walking on eggshells. He's terrified to even tap his toe on an eggshell, because he's just so traumatized from his past divorces.
Doesn't even have eggs in his room.
Exactly.
He's like, go to the grocery store.
And I started to realize that it's wait, Jerry's got fantasy going on too, which is in his head. The fantasy is if I ask to turn the AC down, my girlfriend's going to get angry at me. That's completely irrational and unreasonable. It's just as detached from reality as some of these other fantasies. And so I started to notice this in other people I was talking to, and I'm like, huh. And then of course, obviously you think about the love and romance thing, and the Disney fantasy of living happily ever after and everything. And so fantasy ended up becoming one of the central themes of the project. We fantasize a lot about love, and we invent these stories in our heads about our partners, about our relationships, about people we want to date or people we think who would be perfect for us. And a lot of times these fantasies are completely detached from reality. And so they end up hurting us a lot. B, a lot of times they're kind of a defense mechanism. They're a way to protect ourselves from having to face reality.
That's fascinating, because I always think of it like the Disney
positive.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because a fantasy by definition is being detached from reality. But we kind of think, if I'm fantasizing about something, it must be something
good.
really positive. Yeah, it must be really good. Yeah, that's fascinating. And so we've talked about the three characters, right? I'm calling them characters. They're real people. The three subjects that you had. Can you give us quick summaries of the other two?
Sure. The other two, one is a 30-something-year-old man from Utah named Mike. And Mike's the best, man. I talk about detached from reality. It's fun.
I want to meet him.
He's a great guy. I mean, he's one of those guys that you actually start kind of feeling bad for him, I think about halfway through. Because originally he came to me, he was like, man, I can't get off Tinder. I'm just I'm addicted to Tinder.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, all right. I think I did a preliminary call with him, let's see where this goes. And he just ended up being such a character that I was like, oh my God, I have to talk to this guy. And so, yeah, I mean, he's just completely deluded. He bought his ex-girlfriend a house to try to get her back. I'm like,
just insane.
Was he he was the one that would fly all over the place for a first date? Was that the same guy?
Or I had to talk him
you
out
talk
of
him
it.
down from that. You're like, no, don't fly across the country for a first date.
But talk about fantasizing.
Right.
Yeah?
Oh yeah, man. Yeah. And it's funny too, because he's on paper you would never assume that. He's a button-up corporate guy from Utah, Republican, very manly, renovates his own house and builds his own drywall and all this crap. And he's just the most rampant fantasizer and romantic, maybe in the entire project.
You know what? We get people that reach out being like, is it a good idea that I go to France and meet up with this guy for a weekend? This definitely
no.
We're
Nope.
if you want to go on a trip, go, but don't go because you think that this is gonna happen. And they're like, yeah, but he doesn't want to do long distance, but should I still go anyways? And we're like,
yeah, they keep creating excuses for the other person. I always say, stop being someone's publicist.
Yeah.
Because that's not your job.
Right.
You need to stop defending them and making them sound so good.
It's amazing how, and I mean, these are usually they're smart people, right?
Yeah.
They're very competent in other areas of their lives, but it's just amazing how for a lot of us, and I know I was the same way for a long time, my IQ just gets cut in half. And I'm like, yeah, it sounds like a great idea. Let's go do it. It's horrible.
I mean, I think it is the fantasy that all you need is love, like what we talked about earlier, because I mean, I've definitely experienced that too, is like, I thought no matter how much I love someone, like all the other problems didn't matter. Like I could fix it, right? I know we don't like the word fix, but I actually thought that for a while. That
Julie, can you give us an example of a time you did that? Because I can think of one in particular. This is when I was in New York. I was in love with this guy and we broke up because I was just being crazy on my own. And I thought that if I would run into him on his way out of work, that we would have this encounter and we would slow-mo run into each other's arms and say that we love each other. So I literally would walk past the street every day around 6:30, knowing he got off work around that time, hoping to run into him. Never did, thank God, because I would have he would have definitely known I was a stalker. But in my mind, I kept thinking, we just need that one more chance encounter. And when the universe brings us together in his eyes, we will fix everything and everything will be perfect.
Yeah, I mean, I think my example is a little different, which is actually good because it can show the extreme differences of how this shows up in people's lives. But like, I was in a relationship for over a year with someone that I really truly loved, and he loved me as well, but he just had other things going on in his life, like in terms of just challenges he was facing that was totally external to our relationship that prevented it from getting to that next level, like of getting married, moving in together, all of that. And I think for so long, I thought I could fix those problems. And the problems were things he really had to do on his own. And I just couldn't. Like, it just wasn't possible. So yeah, I think it really can range to like what you were just saying, Yue, having this fantasy of like running in and saving the day versus being in something really thick with someone where two people, like, I do strongly believe in my heart that we both really do love each other. It just didn't work because love is not enough.
Yeah, right person, wrong time. My fantasy story is pretty similar to yours. That first girlfriend, that toxic relationship. So, you know, like most toxic, especially young toxic relationships, we broke up and got back together like 5 different times. And after one of I think actually it was the last breakup, and we were doing long distance because we went to different universities. That last breakup, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to stand for this. I'm going to like show her that I love her and that, you know, I'm committed to this and blah, blah, blah. And so I didn't tell her anything. I got on a bus, sat on a bus for 8 hours.
You started with a bus? Bus is never a good idea. It never goes well.
Going downhill.
Bought a bus ticket. Showed up at her apartment.
Oh, God.
Unannounced.
Oh.
And it didn't go well. Oh. I mean, she let me stay for the night, but
thank goodness.
Yeah, she's like, you gotta get out of here.
It wasn't as romantic as you had played back in your head.
No.
You know what though? Okay, what is the line though? Because this actually made me think of another situation I was in. Like last year, a relationship of mine ended because my boyfriend lost his visa and had to move back to the UK. And I think I am definitely more of an emotional person, and he was very logical. And I was all for doing long distance and really trying to make it work. And he was like, realistically, like, how is this going to work? Like, it was very black and white. And I think everything he said made sense, and I don't fault him. But I do also believe if two people are really committed to something and in it, they can make something work. And maybe that's me having the fantasy. I don't know. What's the line? Because it's not necessarily ideal to live our lives with no fantasy either.
Sure. The fantasy is okay as long as it kind of exists within the bounds of trust. So for instance, like flying to France to meet a guy that you've never met before, like you don't know this person, they could be an axe murderer, like that's unreasonable, you know? Whereas if you've been dating somebody for 5 years and they move to France, then flying out there totally makes sense. You know, maybe that will reignite something. Maybe that will lead to a conversation that could create something. It's one of those things where the relationship kind of has to earn the fantasy. It has to earn the right to the fantasy. The fantasy can't save a relationship. It has to like magnify what's already there.
And there needs to be context. I think like in history, I think like we think the big romantic gesture can save it. And then if it
works
comes
in the movies.
Yeah. And I think that's where we've gotten this idealistic version, right? It's like we think that, like you said, if your story was a movie that you took a bus to see your ex, that would not have ended probably the way it ended, right? And that's what gives us this false hope and ideas.
Yeah.
We've talked about fucked up relationships. I think now is a good time to talk about healthy relationships and some takeaways and parting advice. Before we get into that, Mark, do you believe everyone's just inherently fucked up?
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay, boom. All right, there we go.
There's the takeaway. Done.
Mic drop. We're all fucked up.
I saw an interview of an artist that I'm a fan of once, and he had like the best description of love that I've ever seen. He said, true love is when two people with complementing pathologies meet.
I love that.
Brilliant.
Well, I guess that's a good question, though. It's because we do want to leave this on a positive note. It's like, if everyone is fucked up, what are some ways that we can start? I mean, we talked about boundaries, we talked about being realistic in fantasy, but what are some other ways that you can start kind of taking ownership in having healthy relationships?
I strongly believe that the healthiness of your relationships is going to be a reflection of your emotional healthiness yourself.
Right.
So, I mean, the first thing that anybody can do is just start getting right with themselves, start dealing with their own problems individually, go to therapy, read books, meditate, do whatever you need to do to get to a good spot yourself. Because this is kind of the problem that you were alluding to earlier. If you feel like you need somebody to compensate for how bad you feel yourself, it's never going to turn out well. You need to feel good yourself, and then partner is simply somebody who adds to that.
I think also you talked about in the Audible original about just like having the courage to love. And I think that actually is really important, and something we've talked about on other episodes too, is I think a lot of times some of this game playing and some of this like setting up a boundary to see if they're going to break it and follow through, whatever that may be, a lot of that is a distraction of finding love and having that courage. Like, how do people kind of break through and have that courage?
It's hard because it's proportional to a willingness to be hurt. I mean, ultimately, I think people who go through painful breakups and I get a lot of emails, especially from younger people who have just had their first heartbreak. And, we all remember our first heartbreak. We thought the world was going to end, and but it doesn't. And in fact, you end up being much better for it. Yep. And, I try to remind people of that it's actually going through that experience and seeing that the world doesn't end, seeing that there are other people out there for you, seeing that you can survive on your own, that you can be happy on your own. That's what gives you the courage to say, you know what, I'm going to take this leap with this person and see what happens. And I hope it goes well, but if it doesn't, I'll be fine. That allows you to engage the relationship from a place of confidence and strength.
I always say that love can't be found, it can be felt. And I say this a lot because I feel like by people saying, I'm here to find love, it's like an object that just exists in the road and you just find it and somehow you take it in. But to feel love, you have to feel it from within. And when you feel love, you are putting the accountability on yourself to do that and not just trying to find it somewhere. So it really goes hand in hand with our conversation where, yes, love is not enough, but love is the beginning of you putting yourself out there to at least open to feeling that. Once you feel that, how do you constantly choose to feel the love and work on your relationship?
I love that. And that's a great way to kick off takeaways. I mean, I think the other big takeaway I had from this conversation is also just understanding why you're doing certain things. Like, for example, if you're living in a fantasy, is that because you're just afraid to be in love? Like, are you afraid to bring love into your life? Like, what is the root of where this is coming from? And I think the other big takeaway is if you're in an unhealthy situation, it's better to confront that reality and either work your way out of it. I think that was reassuring that it doesn't necessarily be that you're in a toxic relationship. It needs to be toxic forever. But I think having, again, the courage, it all comes back to courage to be able to say, okay, well, if I do bring this up, I state my needs, I say what I need in a relationship, and they're not willing to meet me or have a conversation, I'm okay walking away from this. And I think that courage is equally as important as the courage to actually find love.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. My biggest takeaway from something you said, Mark, and it just blew my mind. I wrote it down in big capital letters. Fix versus evolve. Can we just simmer on that for a sec?
Yes.
Because we always say, oh, I have this problem, even just like your own personal development problems. I have a problem that I'm always late. I need to fix that problem. Fixing seems so drastic because it's turning one action and you're fixing yourself and going the flip side, going a perfect 180. And it doesn't happen like that. But evolve is so different. It visually, to me, seems like you're climbing a different hill and just making those small baby steps. So in relationships too, it's not about fixing your problems and your issues, it's about evolving from them. And I think that is the most brilliant way to distinguish how we can evolve as a couple. And I also love this idea of identifying the fantasies you've had, whether they're positive or negative.
Yeah.
In fact, maybe all fantasies have a negative impact because they're not reality. So maybe just even plotting out your love history and seeing what were some of the disconnect. What did you want to happen? Identify that as a fantasy and identify what the reality was. And then you were able to find that delta of, oh, that's where that fantasy came from. Okay, that's where my fantasy was and that's where the reality was. That I would do that today.
Oh, that's a great action item for people.
And I'll even throw in my own takeaway.
Yes,
one thing that was cool about the fantasy thing from the project was I realized that this is something that we all do, and it's something that we all continue to do. Like even though I'm happily married, have been married for years now, I noticed that even within my marriage, I create these stories or these fantasies of like what a marriage is supposed to be. What is a husband supposed to do? What is a wife supposed to do? And over again, I realized like, well, wait, why? That's not necessarily true. Like, why do I think that is true? Why am I assuming that? Why do I think that I need that to be happy? And so it's something that it's a lesson that is kind of born out of the dating world, but it continues to be valuable even in committed relationship land.
Well, Brene Brown, she does this with her husband too. So I agree, it doesn't end on dating at all.
Yeah.
But her thing is like when there's something that she's feeling uncomfortable with, she'll say to him, the story in my head is X. And it's really putting out there that this is how I'm feeling right this minute. That might be completely invalid, but let's just talk about it. Let's have an open communication and see if this is valid or a total fantasy. And I think that's like a great way to build a healthy relationship. Like we talked about earlier, it all comes down to how you navigate conflict. So putting that stuff out there and being vulnerable with it is a great way to go from something that might feel more toxic or fantasy land or whatever it is to healthy.
And this is so much about what you've done in Love Is Not Enough is hearing these people talk about what they're going through and just hearing them speak. I feel like they've started to resolve their own issues because sometimes you just have to put it out there in words or on paper. And when you read it or view it from a third party's perspective, it becomes so much more clear.
I think that goes back to the whole evolution piece too. And we're talking about this and we all shared our own situations too. No one is immune to this. Like everyone has been in less than ideal situations or situationships, as we mentioned. And I think you kind of have to go through it. It lets you see what you'll never stand for again. And I think like until you've had these experiences, I think where it becomes toxic is when you keep having the same experiences over and over again and not learning from it, but also cut yourself some slack if you have had one of these situations because it's okay. Everyone's been there.
You got to have them to learn from them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mark, any parting advice for daters out there who want to be in healthy relationships today?
Well, considering we're in quarantine,
start fantasizing quarantine love.
That whole thing about fantasy, you know, like take the next couple months and fantasize like crazy. I don't know. You know, it's hard today. I think it's become such a more complex world, you know, since I started writing dating advice years and years ago. But I think, you know, the core principles hold true. And I think it's ultimately the biggest challenge today is less of the tactics or the nuts and bolts of dating. I think a lot of the problem today is simply getting clear on screening for the right person and knowing your values, knowing what you want in your life, knowing what you will and will not stand for, and then use the abundance of connection today to start filtering aggressively to find people who match those things. So it's
using video calls to screen.
Yeah.
I mean, another quarantine, you could use this time to self-reflect. Like, this is a really good time, like, to put dating a little on the back burner. Not to say you can't do the video calls, but maybe it's really getting clear with looking at your past list of fantasies, the idea, the action item, or even just like what you just said of really pinpointing what is it, the core values that really are essential for you.
Yeah, that's step number one.
Yeah, I've writing a lot about, the last few weeks about how people should use this time to kind of evaluate themselves, evaluate their lives, what they want in their lives, what they don't want in their lives. And so I think that's a huge first step. It will, if this thing ends up going on for a long time, obviously people will want to start dating again at some point. Right. So it could start to get super interesting. But I don't think we're there yet. I think right now, I agree. It's focus on yourself first.
Date yourself.
There you go.
Maybe only yourself if you're quarantined with yourself.
Hey guys, so before we wrap this up, can I just bring it back to the Meatloaf song? Because I never really thought about the lyrics because I would just sing literally the chorus, which is I would do anything for love. But then he says, but I won't do that. What do you think that refers to? Because to me, I'm like, anal? I don't know. Like, what is it? I would do anything for love, but nope, I won't do that.
I mean, every time I've heard this song, my mind has gone to very dark, fucked up places. Yeah. So
murder? I won't.
Maybe all this time he was just helping be ambiguous so everyone could figure out what their own that is.
There you go.
Wow, so deep.
Or it was anal. I don't know. What
or anal, yeah.
He's like, fuckers, I just wanted to talk about anal. That's all.
Meatloaf, the dating guru.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, for being part of this conversation. For anybody who would love to listen to Love Is Not Enough, you can download it on Audible, and you can find out more information at markmanson.net.
Thanks for having me, guys.
So we'll wrap this up. Stay dateable. The Dateable Podcast is part of the Frolic Media Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts. You can follow us on Instagram at Dateable Podcast and visit dateablepodcast.com for access to all the episodes and our premium programs. Also, make sure to subscribe today if you haven't already on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform so you are the first to get all the latest episodes. And most importantly, stay dateable.